The Dawn's Early Dark, a Hank Havoc adventure by Jack Zane. War does not determine who is right, only who is left. Bertrand Russell. Prologue. The Sierra Madre foothills, northwest Chihuahua, Mexico, December 1861. The rider sat his horse with difficulty as he moved along the narrow, rough edge of the high arroyo. There was snow in patches, and even though he wore a heavy peacoat, he was very cold. While the dapple gray mare was sure of foot and carefully stepped between the larger rocks of the escarpment that littered the narrow path, she sensed her rider's unease. The wound in his leg was clearly worse. The glare from the low sun had been harsh, but it was the immediacy and importance of the task at hand that had uneased him most. Captain John Henry Havoc, Hank, to those who knew him best, had ridden straight for 2.5 days through the lower Pecos Valley of the New Mexico Territory and the Chihuahuan Desert of the Rio Grande Valley of Texas to the fort nestled at the base of the Franklin Mountains. Water and forage had been scarce, but in following the old Spanish routes, the essential wells had been found, and the thirst of the parched horses and riders slacked. But then the chase into Mexico, the loss of his men, and near complete disaster. Hank Havoc wore a standard Marine Corps officer's keepee with its distinctive red and gold bugle badge with a letter M in the center. Attached to the keepee was a khaki havelock that kept the sun off the back of his neck. For ease in riding, he had on the short, dark blue Marine officer's fatigue jacket with its distinctive gold-braided Russian knot shoulder epaulets with their red borders, one of which was torn. While the jacket was faded and was sweat-stained, it was trimmed with gold lace on the standing collar and around its cuffs. The jacket had 16 Marine Corps buttons on its front, 3 of which were unbuttoned at the neck, and 2 on each sleeve. Havoc wore pale blue cavalry trousers and well-worn brown leather boots. He had dark hair, which he wore long, and his beard was lightly streaked with gray. Havoc was a tall man with a strong, hard face, and both women and men considered him handsome. In their passion, women had told him he was beautiful. Havoc preferred the slashing and cutting flexibility of the heavy 1841 pattern U.S. Navy boarding cutlass over the lighter cavalry saber, and that was the sword he carried. The cutlass was the main sword of the seaman, with a thick blade enough to hack apart a man or rigging alike. It was a simple but savage weapon. The large guard protected the sailor's hand from all manner of blades in a frenzied shipboard fight. It had an eagle on either side of the pommel, a fish scale hand grip, and the ship's rack number on the guard. In his belt holster, Havoc had one of the new 6-round 36 caliber 1861 Navy Colt revolvers and the 7-round 56 caliber Spencer repeating carbine in his saddle scabbard. The Colt was a percussion cap and ball revolver, and Havoc used paper cartridges that increased the speed with which the revolver could be reloaded. While similar in design to the heavier 44 caliber 1860 Colt Army revolver, Havoc preferred the lighter recoil as did many cavalry soldiers of the 1861 Navy. The cylinder of the revolver was engraved with a scene of the victory of the 2nd Texas Navy at the Battle of Campeche on May 16, 1843. It was a sleek and handsome firearm. To load each chamber, Havoc had to slip the paper cartridge into the front of the chamber and seat the ball with the loading lever ram on the gun. He could then place a percussion cap onto the nipple at the back end of the chamber. He could reload 6 cartridges in about a minute. Havoc carried cartridges, percussion caps, and balls for the revolver in his ammunition pouch. The Spencer was the world's first metallic cartridge repeating rifle, and it was a shorter and lighter carbine designed for the cavalry that Havoc used. It fired copper rimfire cartridges that were stored in a 7-round tube magazine. In his saddlebags, he also carried the Blakesley cartridge box, which carried 10 tubular magazines and an additional 200 rimfire cartridges for refilling the magazines. The cartridge box allowed Havoc to withdraw a tube of cartridges and slide them quickly into the magazine aperture in the buttstock. While somewhat more difficult to aim because of the shorter distance between the sights, the carbine had the same effective range, about 500 yards, as the larger and heavier Spencer rifle, and Havoc had learned to use it with deadly effect. A small satchel contained 2 Army topographical field-drawn maps of the New Mexico and Arizona territories, a small notebook, and some personal papers. He also had a copy of John Augustus Mitchell's map of Mexico, published during the Mexican War, that he had found on a dead newspaperman in Guaymas. In his inside jacket pocket, he carried a compass housed in a well-worn wooden case. Good maps, when available, and a compass were always essential. Havoc now had to get back across the border. He had ridden hard, knowing that the columns of men, artillery, and wagons that he had seen marshaling at Fort Bliss threatened the troops from California and the Colorado Territory and the key forts in the north. While those were his immediate concerns, Havoc, of course, also knew that it was denying the Union the much-needed gold and silver from the mines in Colorado that posed the greatest risk. If the columns of men moving out of Texas were able to occupy the territory and seize the northern mines, then the Navy would be forced into the very difficult task of blockading hundreds of miles of coastline on the Pacific in order to protect the gold fields of California. Havoc couldn't help thinking of that coastline, the great wide Pacific, and the small naval station at San Diego that had been his billet for 3 years. And he remembered his friends and fellow Marines on those ships and how his Marine platoon had been seconded to the small detachment of naval infantry assigned to ensure control of the vital Fort Yuma, Colorado River ferries for the Union. Army supplies brought from the Benicia Armory by steamboat were critical to provision the California column riding from Los Angeles to retake Confederate Arizona and to fight the Texans in New Mexico, planned for the following year. Havoc's Marines and the sailors of the Blue Jacket Landing Brigade had disembarked at Puerto Isabel, Sonora, at the mouth of the Colorado River Delta on the Gulf of California. After transferring to a naval gunboat, they had steamed north on the Colorado from Port Isabel to Fort Yuma, meeting the California column that had marched from Los Angeles. After arriving, Havoc had been given special orders that had been waiting for him to ride east of Fort Craig in the New Mexico territory. During the Mexican War, the Marines had fought with the Blue Jackets in the capture of towns and ports in both California and Mexico, but Havoc had never fought this far from the sea before. Through a rough and pained grimace, he yielded a brief smile at the strangeness of it all. Except for Havoc and a squad of 12 Marines, the Blue Jackets and the Marine platoon had remained at Fort Yuma to man the Colorado River gunboats and protect California from an attempted Confederate invasion from Arizona. During the Napoleonic Wars in Portugal and Spain, an exploring officer often went on solo reconnaissance missions deep within enemy-occupied territory. Carleton was an avid reader of military science and history and a devoted student of Arthur Wellesley, the first Duke of Wellington, and his campaign against the French during the Peninsular War. The Duke had been a strong proponent of using daring officers to gather the much-needed intelligence about the terrain and potential troop maneuvering on a yet unseen battlefield, and Colonel James Henry Carleton adopted this tactic. The orders that Colonel Carleton, commander of the California Column, had given Havoc at Yuma commissioned him as an exploring officer and requested that he report to Colonel Kit Carson at Fort Craig in the New Mexico Territory. Upon arriving, Havoc had been attached to the spy company of scouts at Fort Craig. He had first met the legendary scout during the Mexican War, and the two men had become fast friends. The Marines had left Yuma, along with a reconnaissance company of the California Volunteer Cavalry, to assess Confederate strength and disposition ahead of Carleton's main column. Havoc had often been called a horse marine by the Blue Jackets. He figured that's what he damn well was now, and grinned. With all the real war in the East, Havoc thought to himself, how was it that a captain in the naval service of the United States had somehow found himself in the desert of northern Chihuahua? Havoc pushed the remembrance and his smile away. The remaining scouts following the Comanche attack should have gotten back to Fort Craig well ahead of the Confederates with the Fort Bliss information. "Stay with me, girl," he whispered to the mare as he stroked her neck and she nickered back. She was a strong Morgan horse, a cavalryman's horse. Compact and refined in build, she had strong legs, an expressive head with large, prominent eyes. The horse had well-defined withers, laid-back shoulders, and an upright, strongly arched neck. Her hindquarters were strongly muscled, a strong, powerful horse, and an easy keeper. With the brief memory gone, he now felt bone-tired, knew he had bled too much, that his horse was favoring her right foreleg, and close to exhaustion. There was no more time. But as the mare cleared the top of the arroyo, and the softer valley broke before him, the little Mexican pueblo, nestled close to the bend in the small brown river, came into view.